Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Georgia Rose. Please permit me to welcome you to day 2 of our annual Public Parenting Lecture Series, hosted by the Department of Sociology, Psychology and Social Work of the University of the West Indies, Western Jamaica Campus, in partnership with the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Unit of the Ministry of Health and Wellness and the Western Regional Mental Health Unit. Welcome once again. This evening is part 2 of a 3-part lecture series. Last evening, we commenced with our keynote address from adolescent health specialist, Dr. Abigail Harrison. And this evening, we promise to get better as we foray into the domain of fathering in Jamaica with Dr. Alfred Dawes and attorney at law, Natalie Reed. Tomorrow, we will conclude with real-life stories from parents from our Jamaican soil. I want to take a few minutes to introduce our moderator for tonight's proceedings. An esteemed son of the soil, Gabriel Heron is currently the Vice President of Marketing at Jampro. His accomplishments are immense, so I will not attempt to list them all, including spearheading the development and marketing of the only Caribbean-owned online remittance payment processing website servicing in the UK, USA, and Canadian markets. Gabriel is proud to have worked with homegrown iconic Jamaican brands such as J. Ray and Nephew and Jamaica National. But today, he stands here as our moderator under the title of one of his greatest accomplishments, that of father to his 2 lovely, active boys, Jacob and Joshua, whom he shares with his wife, Stacey Ann. Welcome, Gabriel, and I turn over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Georgia. Much appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a wonderful discussion here for us this evening. We have 2 esteemed guests. Our first presenter will be Dr. Alfred Dawes, who will go through the topic, securing a place for the Jamaican father during a global pandemic. Now, Dr. Dawes has an extensive background, which when I initially got the bio, I was just like, hold on, this is half the program. You know, this man is well experienced. But that said, I'm gonna try and summarize it as best as possible. And I'm happy to say that we have these doctors with us on this program today. After Dr. Dawes, we'll have Miss Natalie Gray, who is an attorney at law, and she will go through the rights of the Jamaican father. And of course, that is critical in this these situations. No. So Dr. Dawes, he actually hails from Clarendon in Jamaica, of course. He attended Clarendon College and Monroe College. As a Georgian, I won't speak more to that. But anyhow, his love was always medicine, as he grew up in a family with deep roots in healthcare. This led him to pursue a Bachelor of Medicine and Bachelor of Surgery at the University of the West Indies. Dr. Dawes completed his internship at the Mandeville Regional Hospital after obtaining his medical degree in 2004. His travels has taken him to Bahamas, Brazil, and then back to Jamaica, earning numerous accolades along the way. Too many to get into here. For example, he was the first vice president of the Jamaica Medical Association. Upon his return to Jamaica, he worked as a registrar at the Spanish Town Hospital. He quickly put his literary talents to use as a columnist for the Jamaica Observer and later the Gleaner. In 2015, he relocated to Freeport, Grand Bahia, where he briefly worked as a consultant general surgeon at the Rand Memorial Hospital. While at the Rand, he developed, and correct me if I'm pronouncing this correctly, laparoscopic surgery program by tutoring residents and performing several advanced laparoscopic procedures. Dr. Dawes then returned to Jamaica in 2016 to take up the post of Senior Medical Officer at the Savannah Lamar Public General Hospital. As we can see, Dr. Dawes is well-traveled. His 3 years at Savannah Lamar were marked by extensive infrastructural developments and expansive clinical services. At the end of his contract, Dr. Dawes relocated to Kingston, where he founded Windsor Wellness Center, a provider of holistic medical and surgical services. Dr. Dawes is a member of the Association of Surgeons in Jamaica, the Medical Association of Jamaica, the World Association of Gluteal Surgeons, the High-Tech Surgery Club, and a fellow of the American College of Surgeons. I could go on, but I think Dr. Dawes needs no more introduction. He enjoys reading, clearly traveling, listening to music, and outdoor activities. He's married and has one son. Dr. Dawes, wonderful introduction. We're really happy to have you on the program here today. Over to you. The topic, securing a place for the Jamaican father during a global pandemic. And I'm very eager myself to hear your discussions and the points you bring forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. And we won't go into the whole school rivalries with Monroe, you know, one of the top country schools, and George is one of the top cooperative schools, especially when it comes to football.
Right.
But the topic, I look at it as a challenging topic. What is the role? How do we secure the place of the Jamaican father in this strange era that we're going through? Is not just 2020, as everybody keeps talking about. 2020 is a bad year. It's going to go into next year, unfortunately. So we won't see any normalcy returning to our daily lives until maybe 2022. And that's the unfortunate reality that we have to live with. We are still not out of the woods. We have not turned the corner. So how are we going to play our roles, not just as heads of households where it did apply, but to nurture and guide our children during these troubled times? We have no experience in these matters. The last pandemic of this nature was 100 years ago. Some of our grandparents were never alive during that time. We never heard of it in many instances until we started to talk about COVID-19. So this is new for all of us, even the experts, and we're all winging it. And if we fail, we will leave a scarred generation who can change for the worst everything that we have accomplished over the last 100 years. All of the values can change, all of the priorities may change. And so it is extremely important that we are able to be around, even if it's by Zoom or WhatsApp, to be there for our children. And that's what I want to get into a little bit tonight. There are challenges for the father and there are challenges for the children, and how we overcome these challenges is what will determine whether or not we have good fathers out there who are able to rear good offspring. And I was reminded of a quote recently: the child is the father to the man. And it simply means that who you are as a child, with your values, your priorities, your attitude, will shape how you grow up to be as an adult. So it is extremely important that we rear our children in the way that we would want to see them as men. Now, the role of the father, I look at it as not just to be a breadwinner. A lot of persons out there, they provide financial support to their families, and they believe that that is enough. You know, one of the cliche statements in TV shows and movies is that, oh, I'm a good dad, I take care of my kids. What does taking care of your kids mean? Does it mean that you send money for them, or does it mean that you're able to spend time with them? You make some time to, in spite of any challenges you may have in terms of a nuclear family unit, to nurture them the right way and instill values and be there for them. Because no matter how, and this is not an indictment on the strong women out there, strong single parents, but it is no matter how strong you are, sometimes it takes a man to really whip a child into shape. And I don't mean that literally, but I can speak for myself. You know, all it takes is a little threat for my son to fall in line. You know, I'm going to tell your daddy, and he changes whatever he's doing immediately. So sometimes, no matter how, I know if single mothers have said the same thing again, you know, especially with boys, it's difficult unless they have a father figure to kind of guide them, because they will look on us as persons who have been through similar challenges, hormonal issues, trying to become on your own, identifying as an individual rather than living in the shadow of your parents. We have that role to play, especially with boys. And then with girls, it's different. You know, there's a saying that boys belong to their mothers, girls belong to their fathers. And it is true in which there are some studies that show that you know, girls who had issues with their fathers growing up, they tend to have relationship issues as well, whether it's trust or whether it is truly believing in somebody and opening up in that husband or you know, the other person they're in a relationship with. So what happens during these critical years, these formative years, is extremely important for the father, not just to provide financial support. That's important, of course, but to also be there emotionally and as a disciplinarian, and to, of course, instill the values that you believe will help your child growing up in this world. Now, the challenge is peculiar to the Jamaican father. The typical nuclear family that we read about, the mother and father and two kids with a white picket fence on the house with a dog or a cat, that is seldom the case in Jamaica. The truth is that we have a significant number of single-parent households, and these single-parent households often have the children living with their mothers or grandmothers, and the father is not around. So when you are not in the house every day as the father figure, maybe it's a grandfather, maybe it's an uncle who is spending more time with your child, then that is a challenge that you will have to arise to on a regular basis, even pre-COVID. How can you spend enough time with your child, especially if you're balancing other duties, other families in some instances? So that is one of the major challenges that we have. I think it's about half of children in Jamaica are born out of wedlock. And that is something that we really need to look into. I know in the US, they speak a lot about the welfare state developed in the 1950s, where it was incentivized for parents to be single rather than living under one roof in order to secure welfare benefits. But in Jamaica, we really have to look and see, you know, how we can get fathers to play a greater role in the development of their children. That has been a challenge from before, and I think how we're going to do that is to highlight more positive role models out there who look at parenting as not just sending money once a month and paying school fee and buying back to school goods once a year whenever that it arises. So those are the challenges. Other challenges may be that there is a testy relationship with the child's mother, and somehow they can't get past that broken relationship to say, all right, this is bigger than just a lover's spot. We have to look at the interest of the child. We're rearing a child together. So there's often weaponizing of children, one parent against the other. And you know, as one of my friends told me, you know, he heard so many times growing up, whenever he did something bad or whenever his grades were not good in school, his mother would say, "You're worthless like your papa." And unfortunately, we get these negative associations with a father who is not in the household being meted out to the children, especially boys. So these are things that we have to look at on a whole and not just with respect to COVID. Now we have all of these issues already, and then boom, somebody ate a bat in Wuhan that most of us never even heard of before all of this. And we end up with COVID. And this pandemic is not going anywhere right now. As a matter of fact, there are some who believe that the worst is ahead of us. But two things are happening. One, the disease itself, and the second negative effect of the outbreak is the effect of the measures to contain it. The disease itself is not as fatal as it was initially. Maybe it's a milder strain that has evolved that's taking less lives, but it is extremely contagious, and persons are getting sick, and we are going to have persons being hospitalized. We are going to lose some friends or loved ones, family members, and those may have an impact on the psyche of the children. Unfortunately, it's the grandparents who are more likely to die, and that can affect the children who may be close to them. So the impact in terms of sickness and death is one thing, but the social distancing and the quarantine and the economic fallout are probably more impactful all around. More people know someone who has had a downturn in business. In one survey in Jamaica, recently it was reported that 80% of Jamaican households had seen a cut in income, and we're worse off financially than we were last year in the majority of cases. You do, of course, have the outliers like Elon Musk and all of these billionaires who have seen their wealth grow sometimes fivefold, tenfold. But for the average person who has seen a downturn in their business, has seen salary cuts, they have been laid off, or they may have may see their business or little hustle collapse completely. They are in more dire financial straits than they were last year. This is going to cause stress, because immediately, if you are the primary breadwinner, it puts you in a situation where you may become dependent on other members of the family, and you lose that place. How is your ego going to affect you? Can you still be the man of the house? Can you still talk to your son or daughter and not think that they're going to be losing respect for you because you're out job hunting, or you're at home and you can't get a job, or you're stressed out all the time thinking about the change in roles or inability to provide, the stresses of mortgage, loans, car payments, and will that affect how you interact with everybody? Management of your own stress at that point becomes extremely important, because you don't want to be that person who has a bad day and you take it out on your family, because that can have long-term repercussions. A harsh word or a physical blow to a child, may have the same effect. So managing your stress has to be one of the highlights of how we are going to get through this pandemic, because depression, of course, can come from all of this. Every day we're bombarded with negative news, and we have to find ways of entertaining ourselves without an entertainment industry, with beaches, rivers, simple things like the usual Devon House ice cream trip, family outings, restaurants. All of those things have been cut significantly. How are we going to keep the morale of the family together? How are you going to hold it together if you have been hit by the economic downturn? So healing yourself, accepting that there may be something off with you because of all of the pressures, could be the first step in being that father that everybody needs at that time to be strong for everybody during these difficult moments. Now, one of the greatest challenges, of course, is to the children. Children are social creatures. They hug, they love to play, they're very touchy-feely, intimate, hugging grandma, jumping up and down on everybody. And now all of a sudden, they have to be wearing a mask. They can't go near grandma and grandpa again. They can't see them. Sometimes you visit them, they're outside talking to them through a grill. They can't see their friends. School is out. They're missing that social interaction. They can't be going outside and playing in the parks or playing football with their friends because of the social distancing that has suddenly become the norm. What is happening to their development? Humans are naturally herd creatures. We always try to find a little clique. We always try to identify with persons around us, whether it's through your community, whether it's your church grouping, whether you think that George's is a good school or not. You know, we always find some way to be a clique, and we naturally gravitate to persons who are similar, are in similar situations to us. All of a sudden, all of that has been stripped away completely, and we are isolated beings. We were locked up for a while in quarantine, and one of the things that being in isolation, being alone, being away from physical contact with others does, is that it sends you into depression. The chemicals in your brain change. It is so bad that it can actually suppress your immune system and raise your stress hormone levels. One of the worst things, I was reading Mandela's life story, Long Walk to Freedom, and one of the biggest punishments, greatest punishments they could do, not to take away anybody's food, not to send them to work or anything like that. It was to put them in isolation. That was the worst thing you could do to a prisoner on Robben Island. And it's the same. You put them in the hole, whether it's an apartment or whether it's in prison, you put people in isolation. They can't. They don't have any regular activities to do. They lose the social contact. It is only then that you realize how important being around others really is. I saw a study recently sent to me by some friends. I don't know how true it is, but they said that men live longer if they go out and have drinks with their friends at least twice a week. Maybe somebody's trying something to get us to have that regular guys night out. Maybe it's true. I would more lean towards maybe it's true part of it because we're social creatures. Children in particular, from the moment they start to develop from parallel play to communal play, children just love to romp. And our children, they love to go outdoors and they like their friends. The culture is slowly changing, of course, where there is a video game thing, but even with video games, it's online gaming where they're talking to other people and they're interacting with them. It's not the same, but it just shows you that the natural evolution of everything, all technology, has to do with communal living, whether it's the internet initially evolving from your GeoCities with Yahoo to now Facebook, Instagram, and all of social media. How are we going to raise children now, knowing that they have lost this period of time in their development, when their brains are so plastic that whatever is said is whatever interactions they have, it helps with the formation of connections between brain cells that will help to shape their personality moving forward in life. How are we going to get that? Now, that is a challenge because we can't just say, oh, we need to take them out, but it means that we need to have greater interaction with children. There's a higher rate of depression. There are some incidents of suicide among children. Children are stressed, and we have to find ways to entertain them. We have to find ways to be there for them. We have to find out how they're feeling and try to see if we can get them out, even if it's a drive out to the country somewhere where there's not a lot of activity and gathering, large mass gatherings. But we need to get them out of the house. We need to let them know that this is not all doom and gloom, that they're going to be all right, and it's going to be over soon, and life is going to get back to normal. This is going to scar some children, but once we are able to take the edge off of it and let them know that this is just a phase that the world is going through, it's going to be all right, and we try to lighten up their lives as much as possible, then we can have happier, healthier children who don't lose the affectionate side, and they don't become introverts who don't. Not that it's bad being an introvert. I consider myself an introvert, or maybe an ambivert at best. But they don't tend to be more withdrawn and not be able to develop the social skills that they would need to get through life. One of the conditions that has been described now that we may be going to we may be experiencing over the next year or so is post-COVID depression syndrome, where because of the confinement and because of the withdrawal, the financial strain, losing family members, not seeing family members, and missing out on these critical points in the development of children, losing time where our elderly parents or grandparents, we're not seeing them as much. That may weigh on us going forward, but who knows? Maybe it's overblown, but it's something that we really have to look out for, especially in children. Missing milestones in growing up. If your child is in another country, or if your child you're not able to see your child, whether because of your job or because of the restrictions, that might be an issue, because you're going to be missing out on significant milestones. Kids grow up so fast that if you miss a couple of months or a year, it may be a completely different little person that you're seeing. And there may be a guilt that you missed out on that period in your life, but maintaining contact at least will aid in keeping that relationship alive, so you can keep in touch with your child, seeing how they're growing, how they're developing. So whether it's a WhatsApp call, or whether it's Zoom, whether it's a simple phone call, texting, just try to stay in touch and secure your place as the male, the father in that child's life. So that's pretty much how I wanted to bring across the issues as communicated by some of my friends who are fathers, and some of the concerns that are out there by the experts. And I think that if we are able to put everything together, manage our stress, manage our challenges, work on the challenges that we had before COVID and those brought on by COVID as fathers, and look at the challenges that our children are having in terms of the lack of social interaction, and the missed milestones, then we might be able to be better fathers overall during this critical period in the development of our children. So thank you all for having me, and I'll just turn over to our host, Mr. Heron.
Thank you very much for that speech, Dr. Dawes. I thought it was very comprehensive, very insightful in terms of you spoke on the challenges that we had pre-COVID, which were already significant from a father perspective, limited understanding of the father's role, the relationship with the mother. Sometimes it's a little bit strained, of course, and at times the weaponizing of children. Now, these are standard issues that go along with being a good father. I mean, there's still a lot of great fathers out there, but we have those challenges, and then here comes COVID-19, and it compounds the situation even more. And we have all these lifestyle changes that we go through, and especially for fathers who are not necessarily living within the home, that even increases the limitation of access even further. And then there's an additional challenge where, as you mentioned, the male figure is seen as an income earner, as bringing home the bread. So there's also that limited reduction or 80% cut in income. How do we as fathers going through those scenarios, firstly before COVID-19 and then after COVID-19? So the challenges are, not saying that the mothers do experience those challenges as well, but fortunately for this forum here today, we're focusing on fathers. Just want to ensure that we clarify for our audience, all right? So I thought that the points that were raised were very, very critical, and I'm looking forward to the question and answers section where you'll be able to expound and explain some of these ideas in more detail based on the question that actually arise. One of the critical points that you mentioned, which I think the audience will want to hear more of, is how do we manage the stress? What are some of the tools and actual tactics that can be used to manage the stress to ensure that it's not passed on to our kids? So coming home after a day of stressful job when you know that things are on the line, how do you manage? How do you ensure that you don't pass that on to the child? And then, of course, you spoke about limited interaction, and kids are social creatures. As a father, sometimes we're distant. How do we ramp it up to ensure that we engage them on those lines? So I won't go into further, but I want to ensure that the audience recognizes all the key points that you raised and start thinking through those questions that we can have a detailed discussion at the end of the next presentation. Our next presenter is an attorney at law, Natalie Reed. Natalie Reed is an attorney at law, as I mentioned, with 7 years at the bar. Her areas of practice include primarily family law, employment law, probate, and estate administration and conveyancing. She's also passionate about intellectual property law, so we're looking to hear more about that, and is currently undertaking further studies in that area. She's a member of the Jamaica Bar Association, of course, and the Intellectual Property Committee. Her foray into the practice of law came after many years of studying as a high school teacher and lecturer for the University of London's LLB program. To date, she still maintains contact with many of these students, some of which she practices with at the bar. She is passionate about the related disciplines of law and history and is actively pursuing interest in both. She prides herself on being able to actively listen to her clients' needs and works assiduously to arrive at the desired outcome. She is skilled at negotiating and has had significant success in this area. She's an avid crafter and a proud lefty who is determined to create a space for left-handed advocates in Jamaica. And Miss Natalie Reed will be speaking to the rights of the Jamaican father. And I'm very eager to hear about this. As a father myself, what rights do I have? Sometimes I feel like I don't have any rights based on how my young boys speak to me. But that is the life that we live as fathers, right? So Miss Natalie Reed, over to you. Over to you. Thank you.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. And I'm especially pleased to share with you on this topic of the rights of the Jamaican father within the context of the law. And I just want to say, first of all, that I've delineated the topic to look primarily at two pieces of legislation, the Maintenance Act and the Custody Rights of Children Act, because those are the pieces of legislation where we find the convergence of the rights of parents. And that's something that I really want to stress, that the rights of the father is also the rights of parents. And throughout my presentation, you will see where I keep stressing how important it is that we understand that the court looks at what we call equity across the board for both parents. So it's not just about mothers, and that's something that's really where I want to start. So I'm gonna share my screen now. Just give me a moment. Let me bring up the presentation. All right, so here we are. So where I really want to start is looking at the background, that popular view. And it really is an unfortunate view that our courts do not favor fathers. And where this may have come from is a tenet called the tender years tenet, where the view was formerly held that it was better for a child under 13 to be with the mother. And it was felt that this was, it was repugnant to nature to take a child away from the mother before that age. And so the effect that we had with such a position was that many fathers shied away from our courts and they suffered in silence, right? They were afraid to go into court to ask for whether it be maintenance or even custody. Maintenances, I find that most fathers shy away more from maintenance. It may be because of their ego. They don't want to be seen as depending on a woman, but there are other factors, but I submit that that may be one of the pressing ones. I'm open, of course, to correction, but that is my view. Now, a change came about in 2005 with the Maintenance Act. And what this act did was that it focused on both parents. As I said before, there was what we call equity. We looked at the welfare principle, which is of paramount importance. So when the court is deciding to make an order for maintenance, they look at the welfare principle. They don't necessarily, again, look at gender, so a father as opposed to mother. They look at the ability to maintain the child. So if it is the mother who is earning more, then the application will be made by the father or vice versa. And so I want our men to understand, or fathers to understand, that yes, it is okay to approach the courts for maintenance for your child. And again, I stress that the rights of the father is a right of parents. It's equal, all right? They're on the same footing. So any parent can apply for maintenance of the child, right? If, of course, there are many instances where mothers earn a lot more than the fathers. And if that is so, then the court is available for our men or fathers to apply to the court for said maintenance. Now, in looking at the procedure, and it is important that you demystify the procedure at the courts, because a lot of persons, not just the fathers, they fear the process. They say, I have to get an attorney. I don't know how to do this, but it's a fairly simple process. Yes, it's best to get the retain the services of an attorney who can file the relevant documents, but a clerk of court can assist. So you just approach the clerk of court, explain to them what it is you want to do. The clerk of court will interview you, ask you what the amount that you're claiming for the child, ask the salary of the applicant and the respondent. So that's the person who has to answer to the claim, the salary of the respondent. And if you have proof, whether it be via your pay slip or an employment letter or such other document, you can disclose that to the clerk of court and they will assist you in filing the relevant documents. Now, once that is done, what happens next is that a summons will be prepared to be served on the respondent. And I must point out here that you need not worry yourself about whether you can find the person to serve them personally. Personal service is, of course, the ideal, but the court makes provision for what we call substituted service. So it could be by virtue of in a national newspaper or on a family member who is likely to bring the matter to the mother's attention. And so you see where the court is, the court is assisting the process. So it's not just one way. And then what happens is that you appear on the stated date, you appear before the judge will ask questions and make an assessment as to who best if the person who is claiming can really afford, and the person who is to answer, the respondent, can really pay, and they issue an order. Now, what we've seen a lot of times, though, is that there may be a dispute. So say, for example, a father comes in. Well, let's use the more popular view. The mother comes in and says, she files an application in the court to say that the father should pay, say, 100,000 per month for the child. And the father says, well, Judge, Your Honor, I really can't afford that amount because I have other obligations. And so what can be done is that there can be a request for a means test so that the court officer will look into the finances and to determine the ability of the respondent to pay the amount being claimed. Now, it's very important that I point out here that you must abide by the court order, or one can be held in contempt of court. And a further application can be made to say that you've not been paying, you've breached the court order, and further sanctions must be made against you. So it's always important to abide by the court order. Now, under the same Maintenance Act, it's important that I just point out the relevant sections. Of course, I will not go through all of it, but section 9.1 is quite important because it points to the fact that each parent has an obligation to support the child. It looks at the child's aptitude for unreasonable prospects of obtaining an education and the child's need for a stable environment. And I just want to point out how important C is, because that stable environment may be with the father. As I said, the popular view is that, the court is not favorable to fathers, and that really is wrong. I have had significant success with fathers where we've made applications to fathers who have got maintenance orders against mothers and custody as well. In fact, I just wrapped up a matter in that regard where the father was able to get, I wouldn't say that he got custody of the children, but what the court did in that instance was that they placed the children with a third party. So they were placed not in state care, but with, I would say, a caregiver, and both parents have access. So every case is tried on its own merit. But in that case, the father was very, staunch in his request that he really needed to take the children from the mother because the mother was felt to be abusive. And you'll see later on that if you're making such a claim, you will really have to give proof. It can't be just, you're saying that the mother is, my apologies, the mother is abusing the child without adducing evidence to the court that that is so. And the court will have to look into that, of course. So that's the Maintenance Act. Now, the other important piece of legislation is what we call the Children Guardianship and Custody Act. Now, the court uses this act to determine who should have custody of the child and the extent of the access. And it can range anywhere from, say, a weekly visit, or mother has the child for 3 days per week, father has the child for 4 days per week, or some other arrangement. It can also include things, for example, say the child lives in Jamaica, that an order can be made that the child will spend holidays, and you can specify the holidays with the father. So you try to maintain a good balance of access as between both parents. And so I want fathers to know that they can avail themselves of the provisions under this act with regards to custody. And so custody, right to reside, and care and control means a right to make legal decision. Now, usually, before I go there, let me go back a little bit. And it's the same thing under the Maintenance Act, that both parties have the right
Natalie,
to apply.
Sorry, Natalie,
Yes,
sorry to
Dr. Heron?
interrupt you. Can you turn on your camera for the audience?
It was not on all along?
Please. We're seeing your presentation, but can you turn on your camera as well?
All right, just give me a moment. I thought it was on. My apologies. Are you seeing me now?
Yes, thank you. Wonderful.
Okay. Right. I think once I
Apologies for the
started
interruption.
sharing screen, it just went, and I did not go back. Just give me a moment. Let me go back into the presentation. Right. So there is an equal right to apply. So under section 7.1, the act states that the court may, upon the application of the father or the mother of the child, and that is where I just want to stop and let fathers know that both parents can make such an application, right, regarding the custody of the child and the right to access of either parent, having regard to the welfare of the child and to the conduct of the parents and to the wishes as well of the mother as of the father. So you do see the equity in the act, right? So as I keep saying, it's quite unfortunate that fathers continue to believe that, the court favors mothers, but the act itself does give the same right to the father as to the mother to apply. Now, going back to the welfare principle, I keep saying that this is the paramount thing that the court takes into consideration when deciding what should happen with regards to the child. The welfare of children and of the child is the first and paramount consideration, right? And so, in anything, no matter what the judge is going to rule, the welfare of the child is always going to be at the forefront of the judge's mind. Now, there are other considerations, for example, the wishes of the child's parents, the wishes of the child, depending on the age of the child, the court can also interview the child to find out, which parent the child wants to go with, the child's relationship with each parent, their siblings, and of course, say, for example, you have extended family members who will help to care for the children. You'll hear me talk about a situation, a case that I'm going to look at briefly, where the relationship with the grandmother was really, really bad and had a negative impact on the children. So I'll soon get to that. It looks also at the child's comfort in his home, school, and community, the mental and physical health of all involved individuals. Now, when the father applies or the mother applies, they will have to file an affidavit explaining the reason the child should remain in their custody. And this can include financial capability, daily care, education, and religious upbringing. Now, this is very similar to the affidavit in divorce proceedings involving children, because you will have to file an affidavit where you recite how the child will be taken care of. It even, as I said, religious upbringing, you have to indicate what church the child goes to, how often the child will go to church, what will be the living conditions, and you will have to state, for example, the number of rooms, if the child has his own room, if the child shares a bed with anyone, and so on, how many bathrooms, how many kitchens, what, if you have a green area, if the child has access to, in this day and age now of COVID, of course, you're going to ask if the child has access to internet and so on, and if they have a working device. So those are the considerations of the court, some things that they will take into consideration. Now, usually joint custody is awarded because, of course, the court recognizes that, you need both parents to help to guide a child. And if it is that sole custody is going to be awarded, then you must show just cause. So, for example, abuse, molestation, mental illness. As I said, in the case that I just wrapped up, the mother was abusive to the children, even to the point where the police had to get involved. No, I must say that just putting that down on paper will not be enough. The court will have to look into these facts to verify them first. And it's also very important to note that these orders are not cast in stone, because if one is not satisfied with the arrangement, they can go back to the court to vary it, because there will always be liberty to apply to the court. So I want to look briefly now at a very interesting Jamaican case, against D. It's a 2017 case, application for sole custody, and it was heard by our Chief Justice, Justice Sykes. He wasn't Chief Justice at the time, I believe, though. Now, in this case, the mother and father, D and F, were husband and wife, and they were divorcing, and the father was claiming that the mother was negligent. She wasn't a fit and proper person to take care of the children. In fact, it even got as bad as the father saying, you know, the son had a problem with his mouth. He had, I believe it was gingivitis. And it was so bad that the father claimed that the mother did not show due care in taking care of that issue that the son had. And if it is, the mother is a medical doctor. And if it is that she had treated any of her patients with such scant regard, then she would have lost her medical license. And it just went back and forth. And, you know, it was a lot of mudslinging in that case. And as I said, this was the case I was speaking about with the grandmother, where the grandmother was always speaking ill of the children. And, you know, in Jamaican parlance, we compare the children to their father and say, you know, you're ugly like your father, things like that, unfortunately. And so a lot of that was happening, and it really had a negative effect on the children, especially the son. And the son called the grandmother the horror of the century or something to that effect. So as I said, in making the decision, the court has to look at all the persons who will also impact on the upbringing of the children. And in this case, it was the grandmother. Now, on the other hand, the mother saw the application, you know, as a way for the father to attack her, both personally and professionally. And she felt that, you know, the father was trying to do all of this to discredit her and really to get back with her, because he had not yet accepted that the marriage had ended. And so, as I said, it really was an awful situation. And, you know, what I found interesting about this situation too is that there was a note in the case that when the court officer, the CDC, in this case it was the CDC that did the report, they made mention of the fact that the community where the father lived had no green area. So you see how important it is to look at not just the home surroundings, but the surroundings in the community. They looked at the fact that at the father's home, it had termites, there were cracked tiles, the curtains were torn. And so these issues may seem minor, but they were still somewhat relevant in the judge coming to make his order. And in making the order, what the court said was that they did not see it fit to grant sole custody to the father. And they felt it best that both parents should have custody. And so the court ordered joint custody. And I found it quite instructive in this regard, where the Justice Sykes said that the mother and the father are expected to be quite sensible about their arrangements for the children. And we would hope that that is something that always happens. But in my professional practice, I've seen a lot of situations where, you know, it becomes quite ugly, and you just really have to tell the parties, we are looking at the welfare of the children. The welfare of the children is what is critical in all of this, right? Now, I want to look at something that is not really, I wouldn't say it's not applicable to Jamaica. I'll tell you why I say that in a bit. What it is that there's no cause of action at common law, but there's a right to sue for making a false declaration, right? And so that could stand, but I'm going to use a UK case to just highlight what I'm talking about. And then I'll segue into the Jamaican situation and my own experience as an attorney at law. So in this case, a 2017 case, Danielle Morris pleaded guilty to charges of forgery using a false instrument before the Liverpool Crown Court. So what she did was that she falsified a DNA test and used it to claim that the child, Darcy, was Jamie's child. And this went on for some time, even to the point where poor Jamie had set up a home in his house for Darcy, and he had placed a bold 12-inch tattoo of the child's name and date of birth on his arm. only to call the testing facility one day and was told that they had never tested him. And so as a result of this, the mother was charged and sentenced to 12 months in jail. Now, as I said, it was not paternity fraud that she was charged with, but more so for making a false declaration indicating on a government-issued document that the child was in fact Jamie's. And so it's important that we look at that. And this is why I say, I want to plug it in a bit to the Jamaican context, because I'm sure all of us are aware of the recent, I believe it was a 2012 recent study where they found that 1 in 3 children were given to the wrong father. And really, that is significant. I don't know if it speaks to the promiscuity of our women. I won't make any pronouncement on that, but it is quite unfortunate. I do believe I heard or read somewhere else, though, that their cases were like 50%. So I think another country is worse than us. I don't remember what country it is, though. But for what it is worth, it really is not a good look, for want of a better term, because what it means is that many fathers are, caring for children who are not really theirs. And of course, under the Affiliation Act, after a while, if you've taken care of the child for some time, I mean, the courts will necessarily look at it and say that you've adopted the child basically as your own, and so you're to care for the child. But notwithstanding that, it's not something that really should happen, but it does happen. And I've had many a client, especially clients from abroad, who call me, and the point at which they find out that the child is not theirs is when they have to do a DNA test for immigration purposes. And the next thing I get asked, because what they reach out to me mostly for is to do DNA testing. How can they get the DNA testing? And the next thing is when they find out that the child is not there, the next thing is, how can I sue this woman for perpetuating a fraud against me? And unfortunately, I have to tell them, that we don't have a cause of action for that in Jamaica. I've had one case where the man was practically suicidal, and we had to, reach out and get help for him because he had invested so much in the child. And so to have his world shattered because of this was quite unfortunate. So, it really is something that can have a significantly negative effect on our men, and we really need to, protect them. Now, I want to just end with looking at the impact of COVID-19. I don't think I could really do this presentation without, parlaying into the impact of COVID-19. Now, with COVID-19, I would submit that working from home gives our fathers a little more time to be able to better monitor our children, whether it be cooking with them, exercising with them, playtime, assisting with homework. I know a lot of mothers complain that, homework tends to fall on them and the fathers are not helping. So this may, be a time for fathers to step in a bit more. Those who are not doing that, I know for us at our home, what we do is that I said, Daddy, you're the technical one. So you do the maths and the science, and I will do the English and the social studies, because Lord knows I'm not good at all of those technical things. But it may be a time when our men will need to look really seriously at seeking maintenance from our courts, because with COVID-19 now, and with the loss of jobs, or, maybe you're not working the same number of hours, for example, you're going to find that your resources are not where they used to be. And it may be time, if it is that ego is the problem, that our men avail themselves, or fathers avail themselves of the provisions of the law to make an application to the court for maintenance. Because Lord knows a lot of women are making more money than the men. I don't see why not our men should not make a claim for maintenance as against the woman. As I said, it's equal. There's equity in the courts. Men go to the courts apply there for your maintenance, for your custody, and the courts will assist. So that, in essence, is the extent of my presentation. I'm open to questions, of course.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Reid. I thought that was a really good presentation, and it brought light to a lot of things that I am interested in. Firstly, you know, you brought up the issue of the fact that, or the perception that the court favors the mother, and I know this perception is generated over years of, you know, the father-mother relationship and what transpires and what results of that. But then you also brought about the Change Management Act and the fact, and I and home the fact that, you know, the rights of parents is equal, and fathers need to recognize that, yes, there is this perception, but at the end of the day, the rights are equal, and we need to take steps to speak to the clerk of courts and get the relevant details to ensure that our rights are protected. And that both parents have access, and there's law stipulated that, you know, as a father, I can actually go and get maintenance from the mother if I'm not being provided sufficiently. So a lot of fathers, I'm sure, don't think in that way. If you are, for argument's sake, taking care of the kids as a father, there is an expectation that maybe, you know, you're not going to ask the mother for any, but that's not the normal situation, mind you. But it's good to know that that is a right out there that fathers can actually access. One of the things that I thought was very, very critical that you mentioned was that the welfare of the child was what was ultimate, and was what persons looked at more, what the court looked at most importantly. You know, and so issues around religion, consideration of abuse, you know, a list of things which I thought was very, very critical, you know, the health of the child. And then you brought up case study, you know, what issues are considered in the case study as it relates to joint custody. So I thought it was a good compilation of the law as it relates to the father. Interestingly, you know, and this is a hot topic, as you know, in Jamaica, you ventured into the DNA aspect, and yes, that groundbreaking. I mean, not say groundbreaking. I'd say it caused a ripples through the Jamaican society about the 1 in 3 ratio, which, you know, it was a big debate in my house. I was like, see, there, a long time I've been saying this. You know, I was a big joke with me and my wife, but it is something that I and home the fact that, yes, there may not be case study to say that paternity fraud exists, but there's possibility to explore false declaration of public documents. And in that case, definitely. That's where the rights of the fathers can be reinforced. So I'll move on from that to thank you again for that comprehensive presentation, and I'll make a shameless plug for tomorrow. Let's not forget, our final lecture will be on Thursday at 7 p.m. when our moderator, consultant pediatrician, Dr. Lisa Banton, will engage local parents on their strategies, concerns, and recommendations for surviving the pandemic as a parent. So before we go into the question and answer, I want to ensure that persons who are on now, you know, log on tomorrow as well at 7 p.m. as we continue this discussion, more specific as it relates to surviving and the strategies, concerns, and recommendations for surviving the pandemic. But Dr. Dawes, I want to go back to you now in terms of some questions that have been highlighted in the chat, and the chat has been fairly active. And the first question here is: we should remember to lighten our children's life. We first have to lighten. 1 second. It's moving. It's very active. Our own life. What are some of the things that can keep us out of depression in this pandemic? And you mentioned the whole idea of managing your stress. You know, how do we go about managing stress and keep us out of the depression in this pandemic? I thought that was a very good question to start off with. Over to you, Dr. Dawes.
Right. That's a very good question, and the answer is a lot simpler. Some persons would want to talk about meditation, yoga, and essential oils, fragrances, those things. Of course, those will work, but two of the simplest things that you can do is to exercise and sleep. If you get adequate sleep, you will see a natural fall in your stress hormone levels. Now, stress hormone levels, they rise throughout the day and through the morning, and then they slowly go down during the day into the evening, and then while you're asleep, they should be at their lowest. So if you get a restful night's sleep, your stress hormone levels will be at lower levels to start off with in that morning, the next morning when they start to rise naturally. So we cannot emphasize enough the importance of getting adequate, restful sleep, not sleep where you're tossing and turning and you have some TV on or lights on in the background and you're waking up or you're not in a deep sleep. That's what you want to get to, your sleep where you're dreaming, or if you're not somebody who remembers the dreams, deep sleep overall. Now, exercise, again, can cause changes in your hormone levels. There are hormones called endorphins that you can get released. You've heard about this runner's high, where persons actually feel like they're addicted to exercising. That's because exercise releases these feel-good hormones called endorphins. Now, chocolate releases endorphins as well, but as a weight loss surgeon, I'm not going to tell you that you should eat more chocolate to feel better about what's going on. But exercise is not only good for your cardiovascular system, it helps you to feel fit, gives you more energy, and but it also releases these endorphins that help with the balancing of the hormones that may be depressed during the periods when you're feeling depressed. So those are the two big ideas I would say that we should start to embrace.
So ensure that you get sufficient exercise and sleep, and if you don't have a weight issue, you can have a chocolate every now and then.
Your words.
All right. So thanks for that, Dr. Dawes. Mrs. Reid, I'll go over to you, and this is an interesting one. What if the father did not want the child? And we're going back to, I knew that this would have been a topic, the whole DNA issue in terms of the rights of the father. What if the father did not want the child, but the mother did not respect his wishes, had the child, and then bring the father to court for maintenance?
All right, so yes, that is quite an interesting
Indeed.
situation, because the father did not want the child, because part of the act also, the Maintenance Act also provides for prenatal care. And so the mother can apply to the court for an order for maintenance for the father to maintain the child in utero. So it would be quite interesting, even if the father did not want the child, that would not play a part in the court's reasoning any at all, because biologically the child would be his, unless of course they do a DNA test and rule out that he's the father. But once the child is his, whether he wanted the child yea or nay, the child is his, and the court would abide by the law and order that he takes care of the child. Right. That's a simple answer.
Okay, thank you very much. And I know that is a topic for that we could debate on alone for the whole night. But
I think we could. But you see, if the court were to make such an order, say for example, or in some twilight zone that such an order was made, what it would do is to open the floodgates, because every father would go to the court and say,
yes,
oh, well, I didn't want the child in the first place, so I should not be forced to maintain the child. So I can see where, as a policy decision, such an order would not be made. Right.
Very, very true. Very true. So Dr. Dawes, I'll come back over to you with this question, and it relates to the having a practical approach to the situation now. What practical suggestions do you have for fathers whose children are coping with the new normal in maladaptive ways? So substance abuse, self-harm, these ways that are, of course, lead to antisocial activities, etc. What kind of practical suggestions would you recommend for fathers and parents in general, of course?
There's a classic study called Rat Park, where they replicated some studies with mice. Now, they had these studies going around where they showed that rats, they kept them in cages and they had the water laced with drugs and they had the regular water. And the rats would always go for the water laced with the drugs. And they're showing how powerful drugs are in that they made the rats choose these harmful chemicals, seeing what it was doing to their bodies, rather than going for food and even regular water. They just kept going back for the drugs. So this was to show you how dangerous drugs were. But then the Rat Park study replicated that same study where they had the drugs and they had drug-laced water and regular water. But this time around, they kept the rats in wide open fields with swings and tunnels to run through. Families of rats were living together. And what did the rats do? They went for the regular water. They didn't do drugs. What that shows is that persons tend to do these self-harming behaviors when they don't have feel-good alternatives. Now, being locked up in quarantine, in isolation, not being in school, is like putting these children in cages. So they're naturally going to go towards something for an outlet if there's no other outlet there. That's what happened to the rats in the cages. I don't want anybody to cancel me because I'm calling kids rat, but it's just a similar situation that happened in that experiment. So what we need to do is to still remind the children that there is life outside of Zoom classes and being locked away and curfews and social distancing. Little trips outside, going to the mountains, there are wide open spaces there, going to the beach, the rivers, getting some sunlight is good. COVID doesn't do well in the sun. As long as it's not a large gathering, you can still get the children outside. Board games sales have taken off significantly. There's a serious domino shortage across the world. We need to bring back children outside of the technology-driven entertainment to now going back to these. Basically, they can spend time with their families playing cards, playing dominoes, Ludo, a lot of these games right now. And these are ways in which you can bond with your children and also keep them entertained. That is how we are going to get through this, by having these children not living in cages because of what the media onslaught is doing and what the restrictions are doing, but still give them alternate outlets for them to enjoy themselves and still live a fulfilling life.
I thought that was very critical in terms of exploring the limited possibilities here, recognizing that you can still have a good environment in the household, getting that interaction as you mentioned. That is something that I definitely try with my 2-year-old sons. It's not always the easiest because the concentration and the fact that video games are so hard and so much of an attention grabber these days, but we want more interaction. And I think that's really what your objective is getting that familial interaction between, parents and the kids and getting them into the outdoors. So thank you very much for that response, Dr. Dawes. I will move back over to you, Mrs. Gray. And this is an interesting one, and it also goes along the lines of the father-mother-child relationship. And I think it hits home to a lot of the circumstances that exist in Jamaica now. I'll speak. How does the court mediate when a child has been poisoned against their father and therefore resists orders of visitation to the father? And this is a fairly common practice locally when the relationship between the mother and the father has deteriorated, and you both said it actually, that the mother would say you're worthless like your father, and that kind of brainwashing occurs, and the child doesn't have a good understanding of who the father is, independent of the mother and the other members of the family. How does the court, and is there a space to explore in that regard for the as a respect to the law?
All right, and this is why our courts partner with the CDC, and the court also has a social work arm. They also do counseling at the family court. They have that unit there as well. So in such instances where it really becomes egregious, where the relationship has deteriorated so significantly as between mother and father, and it spills over into how the child reacts to the father, then we, they can make provisions for counseling to take place, to try and right what is wrong in that regard. So the court really avails itself of whatever resources, because it is a family court. It's not just there to make orders. It's there to maintain the family unit, and this is why the court looks more favorably upon joint custody than they do sole custody, because they see that the child needs both parents in their lives. So they will always, as I said, welfare principle paramount importance. And this is why the court will partner, as I said, with CDA, I was about to say CDC, CDA, and to make sure that the interests of the child or the children are protected.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that response. Dr. Dawes, back over to you. And just for everyone here, we're trying to finish our cutoff within the next, I would say, 13 minutes maximum. So I'll try to address as many questions as possible. But we'll move on to the next question in the interim. And this is an interesting one. Dr. Dawes, have you seen a relationship between children that have absent fathers and mental health, particularly, of course, as it relates to the pandemic now, where maybe the relationship is even more strained, more separated? Is there any direct relationship between absent fathers and mental health?
It's still too early to tell. We're not seeing exactly, or we can't separate to say that the change in mental health in children right now is related to the fathers, or is it related to being at home? There would have to be a study really to show children growing up with with both parents compared to those who are living in a single parent household. And I don't think that data exists as yet.
So is there any past data that shows a correlation between the two? This is pre-COVID-19 as well.
Oh yeah, yes, there is, and that is why I mentioned in the talk that it is like, no matter how strong you are as a single mother, there are sometimes some instances when you need to have a father to exert discipline on the child and to give them advice, because especially in males, they need a strong father figure who they can identify with as someone who has gone through their issues that they're having, whether it's relationships with other boys, being teased, bullied, or with the opposite sex, when the hormones start to get involved. But there is there is some element of worse outcomes with respect to even involvements in gangs and criminalities, when some surveys looked at the background of all of these, some prisoners, and they thought that it was more of a cycle being perpetuated by the system, in that these men were now in jail, being away from their sons, who would form the next generation of the members. So it is a problem, and this may just exacerbate the divide between single parent households and the nuclear families.
Very insightful. And you know, it's something for us to think through as fathers to ensure that we may continue our best efforts to keep contact with our children as best as possible, even if there's a strained relationship with the mother, regardless of those challenges. The next question, I'll move back over to Ms. Reid. I'll continue with the trend. And this is an interesting topic here, and it's quite topical actually. The issue of paternity leave. And where are we now from a legal standpoint, as it relates to the rights of the father to get paternity leave during that period? And can it be moved up to 16 weeks like the mother?
All right, so currently, I know that the legislation has not fully been passed yet, but I know what has been happening is that a lot of companies have been, passing their own rules. I know, I'm trying to remember, I believe it was Flow. I'm trying to remember if it was Flow or Digital.
It was actually Flow, very commendable and groundbreaking.
Right, I think it was Flow, because they, saw the need that fathers are just as important as mothers in taking care of the children, and so they have started to do that. And I would hope that other corporate entities would follow suit. But I want to piggyback a little bit. Even on the paternity leave for mothers, it's woefully inadequate, when I compare it to other places in the world, because I don't know how many people know that for most places you only get 2 months of maternity leave, and 1 month with 1 month unpaid. So you get 2 months paid, 1 month unpaid. And for fathers, it's significantly less. I'm not seeing the equity, even in the legislation that is on the table, the equity with regards to, both mothers and fathers having the same time at home. And so I must say, I'm glad that we're moving in that regard, but I think there needs to be some more equity, to make sure that we have both fathers and mothers at home to take care of the child. I don't know how we're going to work it out to, whether it's going to be an overlapping or the fathers would take, 2 months and the mothers take the other 2 months to ensure that, you always have a parent at home with the child. But we're moving in the right direction. But I would hope that eventually we would have a greater span of time at home with our children, both for mothers and for fathers.
Yeah, and it is an interesting one, because how will the law shape itself in such a way to ensure that is it a situation where the law will vary if the couple is married or is an in-law, or they're separated? What are some of the detailed issues that will be taken into consideration, or will they be taken into consideration?
Well, one of the big debates that we were having, and you have to plug this into the Jamaican experience, the biggest thing was that how would you determine which of the woman in a man's life, say the man has more than one woman who has a child for him, which of those women should get he would get the paternity leave for? And I think even the minister was trying to work out the nuances of that. And even as attorneys, we have been discussing that to say, how practically would that work? What documentation would have to be put on the table to ensure that a father does not ask for paternity leave this month, and next 2 months down the line he wants paternity leave again for another woman. So there are some nuances that really have to be worked out, and I think what our legislators have to be mindful of is that we can't really just apply the law without looking at the Jamaican context. So it will take, a bit of fine tuning is what I'm saying, to appreciate, our unique position with regards to some of what happens with regards to, and I submit, or men having, more than one woman who have
You
children.
don't
So I
need to
think,
expound anymore. We understand exactly what you're saying. And it is a very tricky slope. But I hope that at some point in time we do get to address the issue as it relates to paternity leave in Jamaica and how it is actually issued to our fathers. I like to now move back over to Dr. Dawes. Again, it goes back to the whole mental determination of our young men, of our daughters, from a male perspective. How do we empower young men to step into fathering when culturally we have perpetuated the norm that they are less valuable? And clearly this is a subjective opinion based on the person that's proposing the question, but I'll pose it to you to see to pull your thoughts.
Well, one of the things that surprised me was that the father's name is not a requirement on the registration, the birth certificate of the baby. And it starts right there, the perceived importance in the child's life. And it just goes downhill. Society always asks about whatever you're doing, they're asking about your mother's maiden name when you're signing off documents. It's never really about who your father is. And it's almost as if we live in a matriarchal society. Men are marginalized throughout high school. We know, due to one, we waste time, we tend to develop and mature at a later date than women. Other reasons being that women may be the center of attention in terms of the teachers and extracurricular activities. But by the time you leave fifth form, there's a gap between the males and the females in graduating. By the time you reach the university, it's 70% females, 30% males. We have been doing great as a country in having a high proportion, the highest proportion in the world actually, of female managers. But is that because the men just cannot meet the criteria to be the managers, or is it that the women are so great? Could be a combination of both, but we have to look at the former as an explanation for that narrative that why we have so many female managers. Where are men going? We need more role models. We need to emphasize it needs to be a cultural change right now, in that men have to accept their roles in society as not just breadwinners to go out and hustle, but to be the person in the family who makes rational, sound decisions and who help in the nurturing of the children growing up. We have to break that generational curse, and we have to address certain toxic behaviors such as this whole machismo culture that we have, toxic masculinity, and it permeates all sectors of our lives. In the health field, I can tell you men don't generally go to doctors unless something is bleeding or falling off, or a woman in their life, whether it's a sister or mother or spouse, takes them in to see the doctor, and that can affect their health as well. So we have to change our culture overall. It's not going to be simple, but we have to start, because every day we lose, it's a generation at risk.
Agreed. I thought that was an excellent response, because the whole idea of toxic masculinity, and in particular, as it relates to schoolwork and academia, growing up in Jamaica, you generally find that, there's a shift away from the male academic bright nerd that is not something that is embraced across Jamaica. You know, we more look for the male figure as the athlete and the physical prominence, but as a bright nerd, that is not something that's celebrated by other men, so to speak. You know, so maybe parents clearly, but what we need to do is embrace that side or that cultural perspective more. You know, men who are bright, who are doing well academically, how do we bring that perception or appreciation for those personalities more into our national narrative? Natalie, I'll leave the final question to you to close out, and then I give a brief close out delivery. What legal action could the father take if the mother refuses to go through the whole DNA testing process?
Okay, so I'm not familiar with any court action that the father can use to force the mother to go through with the DNA testing, because under the DNA Act, it is something that she would have to agree to, and if it is that she hasn't agreed to it, then I'm not familiar with any act, any part of the act that would force her to do so. It is something that I could look back at, but at this point, I'm not familiar with any part of the act that would avail them of such, such an action. If you would permit me, though, I wanted to comment on something that Dr. Dawes said, because it's quite important. At the outset, in the last question that you asked him, he said something about the absence of the father's name on the birth certificate. And I cannot tell you the ripple effect or the negative ripple effect that that has when we come to estate administration, for example, where you tell a child that, your name is not, your father's name is not on your birth certificate. And so you need to go to the court to prove paternity. And somebody said to you, but I can't be bothered to do all of that. And so eventually they have to disclaim. And I'm submitting that that leads to, a lack of generational wealth being passed on from, one generation to the next. And so it's really important that we look at that, not just a cultural shift, but to find some way to ensure that, the father's name are on the birth certificate at the front end instead of at the back end. So I thought it was important that I mentioned that.
It is actually a sore point around the fact that the father's name isn't on the birth certificate, and it's something that we need to address as a society, and hopefully we'll resolve that quite quickly. And listen, thank you. I'd like to move off to close. I'd like to thank both our speakers, our presenters today. The chat section is very, very active. Unfortunately, I was given strict orders to ensure that, we keep it tight and we move forward, because there will be further discussion in this space. So pay close attention, and we encourage our participants to join us tomorrow at 7 p.m. But I thought the discussion was very, very insightful. Firstly, around, what's the place for the Jamaican father during this global pandemic, and what are the, amongst the many challenges, what are some of the practical solutions that we can implement? And I thought that Dr. Dawes gave a very good explanation and practical examples of what we can do as fathers, reaching out, playing games in the house, going outside, exercising, ensuring that there's interaction, ensuring that there's a lot of hugging, kissing, that intimacy that sometimes as men in Jamaica, we tend not to embrace, because there is consideration for the mental health issues that has proven history over the years. And of course, we don't have any studies now within the pandemic, but clearly the situation has become a lot more compounded. And then we further heard more from Mrs. Gray around the legal rights of the fathers as relates to maternity and DNA testing. And so those are very topical issues that I'm glad we had a chance to ventilate and discuss these issues in a wholesome way. Again, thank you very much, presenters. I thought that we both that you both presented the topics in a very cogent and well-rounded way. And to our attendees and to our persons who are joining us online, thank you for submitting your questions. Thank you for being a part of the discussion. Thank the University of the West Indies and Ministry of Health and Western Regional Hospital Association. Of course, this has been a very insightful discussion for me. And remember, join us tomorrow at 7 p.m. when we will look at engaging local parents on their strategies, concerns, and recommendation for surviving the pandemic as a parent. Thank you very much, folks. Have a good evening. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your night too.
Okay. Thank you.